Let's get some reaction now. Our chief reporter, Kaveh Solokol, joins us on the line. Kaveh, very good evening to you. We thought the word was from inside the club, that the noise was that they were standing by Graham Potter. They wanted to give him time, a chance to make it work. Why do you think that stance has now changed?
Well, I don't think everybody at the club wanted to give him more time. I think Todd Burley was his biggest supporter. He was instrumental in appointing Graham Potter. And he's the one who's really been backing him and keeping him in his job for such a long time. I know there have been lots of other senior people at Chelsea who wanted to make the change a lot earlier, but ultimately they weren't able to make that decision up until yesterday. And if you look at their form under Graham Potter, it just simply has not been good enough, and results haven't been good enough for a Chelsea manager. Under Chelsea's previous owner, Roman Abramovich, he probably would have been sacked 3 or 4 times. Chelsea have a history of changing managers very, very quickly when results are not going well. And, Graham Potter has had 7 months at Chelsea, and results have just not been good enough. I mean, if you look at it, this year, I think, from the beginning of January up until a couple of weeks ago, they only won 1 in 11 games. Then they had a couple of wins against Leeds, Dortmund and Leicester before the international break. But then they drew at home against Everton. And then that performance yesterday, they just haven't been playing well. They haven't been scoring goals. And unless they win the Champions League, they're going to miss out on the Champions League next season. And obviously that is a massive, massive consideration for Chelsea's American owners.
He came to Chelsea with this reputation of, finally people were saying a British manager with the chance to take over one of the top clubs in the country. He had built his reputation up. You mentioned the results, which are indisputable. I think it's 4 Premier League wins in 19 games. What's behind that? Was the job too much for him? Was it the wrong club for him? Or are there other more relevant factors?
I think my experience of covering Chelsea, the Chelsea manager has always been, somebody with a massive personality, somebody with a big ego, somebody with a CV with lots of trophies on it. You just have to look at the kind of people who have managed Chelsea, certainly in the past 20, 25 years. And if you go back to September, it was a shock when Thomas Tuchel lost his job. You're talking about a manager who'd won 3 trophies in 20 months. He'd won the Champions League. I think when Tuchel lost his job, Chelsea were the reigning club world champions. They were 6th in the Premier League. Okay, they'd had a bit of a mixed start to the season, but it was still a strange decision. Most people you speak to at Chelsea, most people you speak to in football would say it was a very strange decision to sack a manager of the caliber of Thomas Tuchel and take a bit of a risk, a real risk, to replace him with somebody like Graham Potter. Now, no disrespect to Graham Potter, but, certainly under the previous ownership at Chelsea, he would not have got the Chelsea job. And this is a manager who, it cost Chelsea something like £21 million to get him from Brighton, him and his coaching staff as well. So they made a massive investment in him. They gave him a 5-year contract. The new American owners were very impressed with him. They thought he was going to be the man for the future. And they really, really backed him, way beyond the point that most Chelsea supporters wanted him to be backed. But, if you're Chelsea Football Club, if you've spent £550 million in 2 transfer windows and you're 11th in the Premier League, if you're the manager of that club and that is happening under your watch at Chelsea, you're going to pay for that with your job.
Yes, I mean the number of players, and you say the money spent of these new faces that came in the door. You'd have thought that would have helped Potter and helped Chelsea, but in many ways, it's actually hindered him.
Yeah, obviously a lot of the signings weren't Graham Potter signings. That's not the way it works at Chelsea. The recruitment strategy is driven right from the top by the owners. They've wanted to go out and buy the best young players in the world. They wanted to make a big impact in the transfer market. rest assured those signings were not Graham Potter signings. He obviously had a say in them. He spoke to the players before they signed, but he wasn't picking those players. Those were players that were given to him to work with. I just think the issue as well is, players at Chelsea have a lot of power, and you need a big personality to manage them and to work with them. In the past, we've seen people like Jose Mourinho, Antonio Conte, Thomas Tuchel, Carlo Ancelotti, even Frank Lampard. When he was Chelsea manager, okay, he was inexperienced, but his aura, his stature at the club meant that he was respected immediately by the players. I think Graham Potter obviously is a very, very good coach, but the Chelsea job is one of the biggest jobs in world football. And I think to do that job, you need to be somebody of the stature of a Mourinho or a Conte or a Tuchel.
And just before we look on to who they might go for next, a final word on Graham Potter. You say, very well-respected coach. You don't become a bad coach overnight. But what next for him? How much will this experience maybe damage his reputation, do you think?
Well, I think it'll damage his reputation at the top level. But look, I think, he got an incredible opportunity to manage a club like Chelsea. There's no way he could have turned it down. He did his best. He carried himself impeccably at all times. He took responsibility, for instance, yesterday for that result. He's had to put up with a lot as well. It's people have been reporting on the fact that he may lose his job. He's one defeat away from losing his job for a long time. And also it's been well documented that he's had some threats sent to him and his family. So it would have taken a lot out of him doing this job as well. But I'm sure he'll be back. Of course, Graham Potter is going to be back. He's a fabulous coach. He's a fabulous manager. But, a lot of other managers with much more, many more trophies and successes on their CVs have failed at Chelsea. But maybe, Chelsea was just one level too high for him at this point in his career. But look, the results have just been atrocious. I speak to a lot of Chelsea supporters. They've kind of been bombarding me with messages from all around the world asking me, when Graham Potter's going to be sacked, how long is this going to go on for? It can't go on. Chelsea are 11th in the table. They're as close to the relegation zone as they are to the Champions League places. And, something incredible has to happen for them to be in the Champions League next season. And I think to do that, they need to win the Champions League. But as it is, they're going to be going to Real Madrid in a couple of weeks' time, with an interim manager. Who knows what's going to happen in the next few days? Obviously, they've got some targets in mind, but I think it might be difficult to get who they need quickly.
Yeah, and in terms of those targets, that takes us on nicely to that. It's only a week or so that we were talking about Tottenham and the names of Nagelsmann and Pochettino and Enrique. Spurs are taking their time, but do you think Chelsea will act swiftly, and will those three names be on the list?
I think normally the way these things work is that they would have obviously been doing their homework in the background, trying to set up a replacement. At the moment, we don't know who that's going to be, but we certainly do know that they want Nagelsmann, and that Nagelsmann is available at the moment. The information we have coming out of Sky Germany, the latest information we've had is that they're not convinced that he's going to want to move from Germany and take another job straight away. Maybe he'd rather wait until the summer, give him a little bit of a chance to recharge his batteries. Other jobs could become available in the summer as well, for instance, like the Real Madrid job. But, I've been speaking to my colleagues at Sky Germany for the past week. They have been reporting that if Graham Potter was to lose his job, then Nagelsmann would be the number one target for Chelsea. Information we've had as well from Sky Italy regarding that as well. But it just all depends on whether Nagelsmann wants to take up another job so quickly. But that's something we're going to be looking into in the next few minutes when I get off the phone to you.
Yeah, and I'll let you do that in just a moment, Carve. One more question, because I know you've got a lot to do, and I know we're keeping you, but this is such big news this evening, and it is regarding what, how this reflects on Chelsea and the new hierarchy at the club. They started the season with Thomas Tuchel. He was gone within weeks of the season starting. They put their faith in Graham Potter, and 10 games before the end of the season, he is now out. They need a third new manager, and this is the new Todd Bowley-led consortium now running the club. I mean, how does all this reflect on them?
I mean, I'll choose my words very carefully. I don't want to criticise the Chelsea owners at all, but obviously these are people who have very little experience of English football. They've got a lot of experience of running investment companies and becoming very, very rich and running hedge funds. But when it comes to English football, they are relative novices. And they would have been taking a lot of advice from different people, different agents would have been giving them advice. And at the time in September, when they decided to sack Thomas Tuchel, a lot of people were surprised. Obviously, there were things going on behind the scenes at the club as well that we were not privy to. But it was a shock that they decided to sack Thomas Tuchel, and it was equally a shock that they decided to appoint Graham Potter. I'm sure other people, other owners of big clubs probably wouldn't have taken that risk. But I think maybe it was a factor that they were relatively inexperienced in English football that meant that they looked at Graham Potter, looked at what he'd done at Brighton and identified him as, the man, the upcoming coach that they wanted to place their faith in. But I just think it just didn't make sense to a lot of people from the start. And, the jury was out from the beginning with a lot of Chelsea fans as well, who weren't convinced that he was the right man for the job. And unfortunately, it just hasn't worked out. But I mean, in the short term, Chelsea have got a game on Tuesday against Liverpool, a massive game. Word went out from Chelsea this morning that Graham Potter was going to be taking the news conference tomorrow at Cobham. So people were reading into that, thinking maybe that means that his job is safe. But the information we had last night at around midnight was that Chelsea were considering making that change, and they wanted to replace him with Nagelsmann. Obviously, we weren't in a position to report that until this evening.
Carve, I will let you go now because I know you've got to get on with your calls. I think your Sunday evening has taken a different direction to what you were expecting. Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks.
That's Carve Solokol, our chief reporter there on the news this evening. The big breaking story, and we'll have much more throughout the night as we get it to you.